Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yay. Stop, Bill. Last year, I was teaching a class in the summer, and for some reason, my voice always seems to go out. And so we've decided, hey, you know what the best solution to that is to mic me, and then that way I don't have to talk as loud, and it can still come through. And up until about 2 days ago, my voice was horrible. I was having some horrible laryngitis problems, and I don't know what, starting yesterday, it cleared up, and knock on wood, it's been good so far, so we'll see if by the end of the night I'm still holding up. But did everybody get a copy of the materials and the sign-in sheet and sign in on the sign-in sheet over here? We do have snacks and drinks and everything complimentary over there. Feel free to partake. The more you eat, the less I have to put away when it's all over. So I greatly appreciate that. Well, thank you very much for coming here to Summer Bible Study. Just out of curiosity, how many people here have taken one of my summer classes before? All right. Those of you that have, this is going to be different from what you're used to. Like last year's especially, poor Gene over here, it's like, oh no, not more science. I know. There's no science in this class. This is more of a traditional Bible study than what we've done in the past. It's also designed to be more audience participation. So I will be asking questions for discussion, and hopefully someone will say something. That's the point as we go through here. So, matter of fact, if everybody takes a turn, then you might only have to speak once through the entire 6 weeks, right? So, those of you that don't know me, my name is Ken Coughlan. I work here at Trinity. I am the social media coordinator, which means I handle all of the social media accounts. I handle the YouTube channel, the video production, which is why you see cameras in the middle here. We're doing the same thing this year that we did last year, and that is each of these sessions will be filmed, and they'll be available on our YouTube channel probably by sometime on Saturday. So I know there's a few people that are not here tonight that have signed up for the class, either because they're on vacation or some of them are in Guatemala on the mission trip. So if you do have to miss a class for one reason or another, please, you can always catch it on YouTube later on. Again, the channel's called Trinity Joppa. I don't know exactly when on Saturday, but sometime on Saturday I should have it up and available. However, only people who come to this class get the privilege of having the book that you have in your hands. Now, that book is a very rough draft, all right? This is a book that I wrote over the course of about a month to get ready for the class. I got the privilege of proofreading it once, very quickly. I've already found some typos. Gene was generous enough to point out a typo to me first thing today. They're there. I would very much appreciate it. If you do find some, you come up to me afterwards and point them out to me so I can kind of circle them on my copy so I can correct them. You guys are kind of being used as guinea pigs to see how this goes. So if you have suggestions at the end of the class, I'll probably have a little suggestion sheet I'll pass around about things you'd like to see differently, structured differently, whatever. Please let me know, because I do hope to submit this to publishers afterwards when all is said and done. But best way to know if it's going to work is to try it out, right? So take it for a ride. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and then what the class is going to be like. We'll get into all of that. Again, my name is Ken Coughlan. In addition to being social media coordinator here, I'm what's called a Christian apologist. I've been doing that for about, what year is it? It's 2019. Wow, about 25 years, 25 years. Basically what that means, it comes from 1 Peter 3:15, which says, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. And where it says that, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you. That word answer in Greek is apologia, which is where we get the word apologetics from. So being a Christian apologist doesn't mean I'm apologizing for Christianity. What it means is I've studied to try to be able to answer people's questions when they have sincere questions about it, which you can see where that kind of leads to the subject of this 6-week class. This is a class that's designed to try to provide answers to questions a lot of people have about the Bible. And not just, some of the skeptics, I will tell you, will come up on one thing even tonight that ironically I just had to address with somebody on Facebook within the past week. It actually came up in a Facebook meme. And so you do have non-believers that raise these things up as reasons why they don't accept Christianity. And you have Christians that struggle with these things. Anybody who's read the Bible cover to cover has probably come across some portion of it here or there that kind of makes you go, I wonder what's going on there. Something doesn't quite seem right. Maybe it's something that doesn't seem like it jives with your personal sense of morality. Maybe it seems like God's done something wrong there. Or maybe it seems like, well, this doesn't quite fit with what I thought I saw in this other passage over here. And maybe you're having trouble thinking two things might contradict each other, something like that. Unfortunately, I think the Christian church doesn't spend a whole lot of time focusing on those. We don't really deal with them too much. Instead, we just kind of gloss over them and move over to the passages that make us feel good, that we're secure about. Well, there's a problem with that. Number one is if you're skipping over, if you're reading your Bible and you're skipping over portions and not dealing with them, well, number one, you're skipping over part of God's message to you. All right? God chose to inspire that particular passage. Why? And if we're not asking that question and we're just skipping over it, we're missing part of the message he's trying to communicate to us. Another problem when we skip over these things is what happens when some friend, family member, somebody like that asks you about them, if they do, and you're not going to have an answer. Well, not only does that contradict what we're told to do in 1 Peter 3:15, but it can also affect your faith. And so part of the reason why I like teaching classes like this specifically to a Christian audience is because it helps us strengthen our faith if we actually take and tackle these passages head on. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. Now, I do want to talk for a minute about what I mean. The name of the class is Cracking Open the Hard Parts of the Bible. So let me ask this question to open up. I kind of already talked about what I mean by the hard parts. The hard parts are those things that make you go, things that seem to be, did God really just tell somebody to do that? Or what do you make of, for example, if you read Matthew and Luke, and they each have a genealogy for Jesus, and they don't match up? What do you do with that? Well, the answer to that is you make sure you're here for week 5. That's what you do with that. So that's what I mean by the hard parts. And I'm curious, just to open it up to the floor to begin with, if there's any particular passages or Bible stories that you've come across in the past that have kind of made you go, and that you've struggled with. This is the first test to see if anybody's going to talk.
Well, actually, for me, I can't point to a specific Bible passage, but when I've read through the New Testament, I've always sort of gone, because God is, he can be very vengeful in taking people out. And that's always made me stop a little bit and kind of wonder about that.
About God's vengeance and how he seems vengeful. As a matter of fact, you're going to see when it's the opening of chapter 1 of the book, and I apologize, there's no large print edition. The large print edition is you pull out the reading glasses like I have to do. I can't even read my own book without my reading glasses. But that's why we have the slides. So most of the stuff we're going to talk about is going to be on the big screen up there tonight too. But yeah, you're going to see we're going to come across a quote that leading atheist Richard Dawkins, that's part of what he hints on in that quote, and part of his issue with it is that God seems to be very vengeful. What we're going to do in this class, especially tonight, all right, as a matter of fact, you guys are here for the most important class of the entire 6-week session, all right? Because yes, we're going to deal with some specific passages, but in the course of the specific passages we're dealing with tonight, we're going to talk about 5 basic principles, all right? 5 basic principles to help you, matter of fact, let me switch to the next slide here. 5 basic principles to help you tackle these types of issues when they come up. Because obviously in the course of a 6-week class, an hour and a half each night, we're not going to be able to cover every single passage that anybody's ever had a question about in the history of reading the Bible, all right? So more than anything else, the most fundamental thing you're going to get out of this class is a strategy and a way to tackle them and to know what to do when you do come across one of these things. And obviously we're going to do a lot of representative examples as well. So tonight, while the subject of the class is called Is God Immoral? That's because the passages we're going to be looking at largely deal with that type of situation where someone is wondering whether what God has done is moral, whether he's ordered something or commanded something that it appears to be immoral. But we're also going to tackle 5 basic principles. There's going to be a 6th, but that one we're going to come to in week 5 when we kind of shift focus a little bit. And so you could be able to, even if we don't cover a particular passage in the course of this class, you're going to be able to take these principles and know when you come across something difficult, okay, let me go down these one by one and see if they can help me resolve whatever this question is that I'm having in my mind. All right, so that's the primary goal that we have here. All right, so the format of the class specifically is we are going to, like, 6 weeks. They do kind of stand on their own. So if I had a lot of people when they were signing up asking, well, I can be here for 4 out of the 6 or something like that. Well, like I said before, they will be available on YouTube if you want to catch up with them afterwards. You do have the book to read as well, which probably goes into more detail than we'll be able to in the class on some of these subjects. However, each one, as you'll see, kind of deals with a separate topic. So if you miss week 2, it's not like you can't come back in week 3 and you're going to feel lost. You're not. All right, we're going to be talking about something different. The first week, like I said, is primarily we're focusing on these 5 basic principles. Week 2 is going to be the slavery issue. A lot of people look at the Bible and think that God has condoned slavery. Well, did God condone slavery? We're going to take a detailed look at several passages about that. Week 3, we'll be talking about genocide. The biggest one everybody always thinks of is the book of Joshua. Joshua they're invading the Canaanites and wiping out supposedly a lot of the Canaanite cities and killing women and children and livestock and everything. That's what a lot of people believe is going on there. Is that really what was going on there? We're going to investigate that in week 3. Week 4, very timely issue. Does God value women less than men? We have a lot of people that think that the Bible is sexist and that God is sexist. We're going to look into that in detail. And then week 5 and 6 is going to be a little bit of a tonal shift. All right, 5 and 6, we're going to be looking specifically at Jesus' birth in week 5 and Jesus' death and resurrection in week 6. And the challenges a lot of people have around those stories are what they think are contradictions, like the differing genealogies of Jesus I mentioned before that we see in Matthew and Luke. How many angels were at the tomb? Who was the first to go to the tomb? Things like that. What happens is when you have multiple gospels relaying the same story, there's going to be differences between them. Are those differences contradictions? A lot of people think they are. That's what we're going to be talking about in weeks 5 and week 6. All right? So, getting started with that quote I promised was going to be coming. This is Richard Dawkins in his book, The God Delusion. You can probably tell by the title of his book that Richard Dawkins is not a Christian. All right, he is an atheist. But he's very representative of the way a lot of people feel about these issues we're going to be tackling in the Bible. And look what he said. He said, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
I need a dictionary.
Yeah, I need a dictionary too, yeah. I mean, seriously, Richard, why don't you tell us how you really feel, right? I'm not quite clear on that. All right, but seriously, look at that, and I'm moving on to the next slide, but the quote is in the book, if you can read it. And let me ask you a question. First of all, just how does that make you feel when you read something like that?
Defensive.
I'm sorry?
Defensive.
Defensive? Yeah. I know, the first time I read it was the same thing with me. I immediately get on the defensive. And we got to be careful with that. I mean, defensive as far as I want to defend God, that's a good thing. Defensive in the sense that I want to respond in kind is not a good thing. And that's where we start getting irrational and, returning evil for evil. So it's tough. But a lot of the times when people bring up issues like this, especially when we're dealing with so-called immoral actions, things that people see in the Bible I think are immoral, the tone that they're presented with is not, let's have a nice intellectual discussion about whether what God did here was really right or wrong. No, it's just the kind of tone that you saw from Richard Dawkins there. It's an attack, all right? So understand that if you are speaking to someone who is a non-believer and they're bringing these things up, you might have to deal with that tone. Again, I don't want to overemphasize that too much. That's not the sole focus of this course. Part of what we're doing here is also to help you in your personal faith journey and to build your strength in your faith. But like it or not, with a lot of the issues we're going to be talking about over the course of the next 6 weeks, that's the attitude that people have. It's very negative. It's very attacking. All right. I kind of hinted at this in the first question when I asked if there were any problems that people had specific passages, but how about generally? I mean, even if you can't remember a specific passage, has anybody ever, in any time in your Christian walk or even beforehand for that matter, anybody ever had an issue where you've read something or you heard something and you started to question, why would God have done that you're willing to share? Yeah.
Well, when he wanted Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, that I always thought, if he told me to do that, I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this, the Abraham and Isaac one is a big one, which we're going to talk about tonight. Actually, we're going to tackle that one head on. And I had a seminary professor once bring that up and was talking about that. And, he kind of brought it from the same approach you did. It's like, well, what would I do if God asked me to do that? Well, the short answer is, if you understand the context of what was going on there, you got nothing to worry about, because God isn't going to ask you to do that. All right? It would make no sense, given what's happened with Jesus and everything since then, for God to ask you to do that. So it's not going to happen. I had a discussion with someone, again, on Facebook recently, where they asked me something similar about, well, what would you do if God ordered you to do X, Y, or Z? And I kind of pointed out, well, if you understand the full context of the Bible, I can safely say God wouldn't ask me to do X, Y, and Z. So if I really thought for some moment that some voice in my head was telling me to do that, that alone would tell me that voice is not from God, because it would be inconsistent with God's word. And God's never going to tell you to do something that's inconsistent with his word. So one of the answers to a lot of these questions is understanding the full context. And I don't just mean the context of the surrounding paragraphs, chapters, verses, what have you. It's understanding that the Bible is 66 books with one overarching story, from Genesis to Revelation. And if you understand the big picture, you kind of start with the big picture and work your way down. And God's not going to contradict himself anywhere in that. So, all right. So I'm going to tell you a story. The story is on pages 6 and 7 of the book, but I'm probably not going to read it straight out of that. But if you want to follow along, you can. It's the story of Cain and Abel. No, not the real Cain and Abel. I just had to come up with some names to fill in my blanks. And for some reason, as you'll know when you hear the story, that seemed appropriate. All right. So let's pretend there's this nice gentleman. His name is Abel. And he's walking down the street one day. And just whistling a tune, looking at the birds in the sky, good morning, good morning. I'm a big fan of classic musicals. Anybody tell me what musical that's from? We talked the whole night through. What's that?
Singing in the Rain.
Singing in the Rain, that's right. One of my all-time favorite musicals, second only to The Music Man. If anybody wants to make me happy, start quoting The Music Man. I'll start singing right off. Anybody seen The Music Man? The barbershop quartet, all Harold Hill, these just dudes that get them going, and then they'll just start singing and he'll walk off. You could do that with me. Any line from The Music Man. You just start saying it, I'll start going, and you can just leave. So, love that movie. All right. So anyway, Abel's walking down, and he's whistling and all that, and all of a sudden, Cain jumps out of an alleyway and punches him in the face. Like my stick figures, I am not an artist. Punches him in the face. All right? So, first thing Abel does is, he gets up, okay? And then he says, "Ow! Why'd you do that?" And Abel then says, because you can tell the story's written by a lawyer, because what does Abel say? He says, "I'm going to sue because I think you just broke the law. You coming out and hitting me arbitrarily was illegal, was against the law." And Cain says, "No, it wasn't." Abel says, "Yes, it was." Cain says, "No, it wasn't." Abel says, "Yes, it was." And they go back and forth like this for about, 10 minutes. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So my question for you is this. Is there a way they can resolve their dispute? In other words, is there a way they can figure out whether or not what Cain did was legal or illegal according to the civil law?
Go to another person.
I'm sorry?
Go to another person.
Go to another person?
Discuss it.
Go to a lawyer.
Go to a lawyer? What's a lawyer going to do?
Charge.
Okay, but how will the lawyer, let's say the lawyer doesn't know the answer for sure, which if a lawyer doesn't know the answer to this one, they should be disbarred. But if let's say a lawyer doesn't know the answer, does anybody know, what's a lawyer do?
Tries to settle it.
I'm sorry?
Just tries to settle it, dispute.
They're going to look it up, right? They're going to open up the law book, and they're going to look to see what the law says. As a matter of fact, if you've got a particularly complicated case, many times that's what I was taught to do in law school. If it's something that's not obvious like this, I might not give you an answer when you first consult with me about your issue, because I want to make sure I'm right. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do my research. And I'm going to find out what the law says. But fortunately, when we're dealing with the civil law, when someone wants to sue someone else, there are law books out there that tell us what the answer is. So in this particular scenario, if Cain and Abel can't agree amongst themselves, then they're going to open up a civil law book, they're going to look to see what it says, and lo and behold, it's going to say, "Cain, I hope you got a good savings account, because you're about to get sued and Abel's going to win." Right? It gives them the answer. There is an authority above them. They may each have their own opinion. Cain may legitimately believe he was legally right. Abel may legitimately believe that Cain was legally wrong. But like it or not, there is an objective standard above both of them that tells them whether their opinions are right or wrong. All right? Now let's change the scenario a little bit. Change the story now so that instead of disagreeing about whether or not Cain was legally right, now the disagreement is whether or not Cain was morally right. Abel stands up and says, I think that was morally wrong. Cain says, I think it was morally right. Cain says, no, I think it was morally wrong. They go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Is, just like we had that law book for the civil law, is there a standard, an objective standard that applies to both of them, regardless of what their opinions may be, about what the moral right thing is to do? Anybody got a guess?
Go to the Bible.
Go to the Bible. And the Bible comes from where?
God.
From God, right? That's correct. All right? The Bible comes from God, which means God actually is the moral standard. You're going to see where I'm getting to for this in a minute. This is a very important foundational point that underlies everything we're going to be talking about for the first 4 weeks, all right? So, how does that work? What does that mean? Because now we're getting really philosophical here, and poor Jean here was hoping I wasn't going to make her think too hard this time around. I love you, Jean. I won't pick on you anymore, okay, I promise. But if you don't want to pick on, you shouldn't sit in the front row. We'll work on Bill. He sat in the back row thinking that was going to get him out of it, but we'll focus on Bill from now on. He can take it. What do we mean when we say that God is the standard of morality? All right, let me ask you this. Does everybody here have a character? I don't mean a cartoon character. Every person has a character. So people could describe you by describing what you're like, right? Now, hopefully, they're going to say you're good, you're honest, you're loving, all right? All of these things are character traits that you have, all right? Now, let's just take the character trait of goodness. Somebody says you're a good person. Is anybody perfectly good? Any human being, does anybody exhibit that character trait perfectly?
No.
No. But guess who does? God. All right? So when we say God is the source of morality, whether we realize it or not, that's really what we're saying. We're saying when we describe something somebody does as good, what we're saying is it resembles that character trait in God. So God's character, because it's perfect, that's what we mean by saying he's the source of morality. When we say something's good, we mean it resembles that perfect character trait in God. When we say it's evil, we mean it's really the total opposite of that perfect character trait in God. All right? So, what that means is, since God is literally the source for morality, is it ever possible for God to order you to something that's morally wrong? No. You know from the get-go, before we open a single Bible passage, all right, that if God commanded it, it has to be morally right, because he is literally the source of morality. All right, it comes from him. So that gets to our first basic principle, is that even labeling an act as immoral in the first place requires God to be the source of all that's good. Or to put it more simply, the moment somebody objects and says, that was morally wrong, they're assuming God exists. They might not know it, but they are. Because in order for there to be something to be morally wrong, that means there has to be something that's morally right that you're comparing it to. In order for there to be something that's morally right, we just talked about it, God has to exist and has to be that source. All right? So understand that technically speaking, we could answer almost everything we're going to come across in these first 4 weeks as saying it came from God, therefore it has to be morally right. How many of you think that's going to get you a lot of headway with somebody who's not a believer? I'm glad to see nobody's raising your hand. It's not, okay? It's one of those things where technically that is the correct answer for these things. But that's not going to convince a non-believer. And like it or not, there's two aspects that we're all dealing with right here, right? There's our head and there's our heart. That answer may satisfy us up here. But for some of these things, when you're wondering why did God command Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, that might not satisfy you here, all right? So we're going to have to dig a little bit deeper. I'm not just going to give you that one answer and say, class dismissed, see you later, all right? But it's important to remember that is technically the answer. Okay? All right. Now, what I'm going to ask is for somebody to open up. Now, I will tell you that all the Bible passages we're going to be going over are in the book. But again, I know the print's kind of small, so if you got your own Bible, you want to open it up, that's great too. But in order to give my voice a rest, because Schoenberg, I predicted it, here we go, it's going already, right? I think it's something about the dry air in here. I'd like somebody to open up to the book of Leviticus, please. Chapter 20, verses 2 through 5. And again, if you want to read it from the book, it's on page 8. But would somebody volunteer, please, to read that passage for us, loud and clear so everybody can hear you?
Two through 5.
Yeah, chapter 20, verses 2 through 5.
All right, let me get my eyes corrected here. I can't see what 2 starts. All right, I'll start with 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, any Israelite or any alien living in Israel who gives any of his children to Molech must be put to death. The people of the community are to stone him. I will set my face against that man, and I will cut him off from his people. For by giving his children to Molech, he has defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. If the people of the community close their eyes when that man gives one of his children to Molech, and they fail to put him to death, I will set my face against that man and his family, and will cut off from their people both him and all who follow him in prostituting themselves to Molech."
All right. So Moloch, just so you know, was a competing god, so to speak. We're talking about child sacrifice here. Child sacrifice was a very common practice in the nations surrounding ancient Israel. Now, based upon this passage we just read, how do you think God feels about child sacrifice?
He doesn't approve of it.
Doesn't seem to like it, does he? Now, let me ask you a harder question. Why? Based on this passage alone, all right, can you tell whether God doesn't like child sacrifice in general? Or is his problem with it just that these children were sacrificed to a competing god, not to him? I mean, we're going to get to that answer, obviously. I think if you were just to read this passage alone, either one of those is a possible interpretation. If we're just looking at this one, this could be that God hates child sacrifice, period, or it could mean that God's okay with child sacrifice as long as you're sacrificing to him. Just don't sacrifice it to other gods. All right? Now, and that's exactly what critics will pick up on, is they will look at other passages in the Bible, and they will say, hold on, obviously this passage can't mean God doesn't like child sacrifice per se, because there's other instances where God has condoned child sacrifice. So let's take a look at some of these and see if that's really true. The first one I want to look at is Judges chapter 11, verses 29 through 39. This is on pages 8 and 9 of the book, if you want to read it from there. Or does anybody have their Bible and want to read that one for us? I'm going to count to 5. If nobody starts reading, I'm going to call on Bill Schaefer.
What was the numbers again?
It's up there. It's chapter 11, verses 29 to 39. It says 39a. That's because there's a sentence stops in the middle. But if you want to read the whole verse, it doesn't matter to me.
And the Spirit of the Lord came on Jephthah. He crossed Gilead and Manasseh, passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from there he advanced against the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, "If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." Then Jephthah went over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Aurora to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel-Keramim, Thus Israel subdued Ammon. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of timbrels? She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh no, my daughter, you have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." "My father," she replied, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised. Now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. But grant me this one request," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." "You may go," he said, and he let her go for 2 months. She and her friends went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. After the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she was a virgin.
What happened to poor Jephthah's daughter? Sorry? Killed her, right? Jephthah killed her. That's a tough one. This is one of the ones that troubles a lot of people when they read this, because on a surface reading, people look at this and say, did God really just take basically a child's life in exchange for giving her father a military victory? Well, did he? Let's look a little bit more carefully, shall we? Let me ask you a couple questions. First of all, let's face up to it. What do you think of Jephthah's vow? Or maybe I should ask, what do you think of Jephthah as a person? Anybody see him as a role model? No. No pressure, but you got to speak up, because you'll notice right now that Gene was generous enough to read the passage, my voice sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So here's the key: the less you talk, the more I lose my voice. The more you talk, the more my voice survives. So if you don't talk and you don't speak up, then you're sentencing me to a day of silence. And I have court on Friday, so I would really appreciate if I have a voice by then. All right. So here's the key question. All right. Did God give Jephthah victory over the Ammonites? If we were to stop there, the answer is clearly yes, right? It flat out says he did. All right. Did God give Jephthah victory over the Ammonites because of Jephthah's vow? I'll give you an example and what I mean by this to help you think about it. Let's suppose that one of my kids comes up to me. I've got a 12-year-old son, and let's say he's begging for a video game. He's got his Nintendo Switch. He loves his Nintendo Switch. And he comes up to me and he says, "Dad, if I promise you that if you will buy me this video game," it's always Mario or Pokemon, those are his two favorites, all right, "then I will clean the playroom top to bottom." All right? Now, I say nothing in return. He just assumes that he's got a good deal and that he's got my consent, and then he goes out there and he cleans that playroom top to bottom. And sure enough, a week later, he gets the video game. Now, here's the piece of information he didn't know. I'd already bought him that video game before he even asked me whether he could get it by cleaning the playroom. I'd already intended to give it to him. Maybe he had a birthday coming up or something like that. All right? That was part of my will to begin with, regardless of what he said. He just came up on his own and said, "Hey, by the way, if I do this, if I clean the playroom, you're going to give me the video game, okay?" Now take another look back at that passage. Is there anything anywhere in that passage that ever says God approved of Jephthah's vow?
No.
It's not in there, is it? Never mentioned. All right? This is why we need to read these things somewhat carefully. All right? It never says it. So that goes into our next basic principle that will help you when you confront a lot of these passages. It's a very common one. Just because the Bible records an action does not mean that God has condoned that action. I can't tell you how many times I deal with people who will say things like this, who will come up and say, "Well, according to the Bible, God agrees with X, Y, or Z." And I say, "Really, show me." And what they show me is somebody, who's done X, Y, or Z. And I say, "Well, wait a minute. Just because that person did it doesn't mean God condoned it, doesn't mean God agreed with it." I got news for you. Guess who is featured in the Bible? Throughout the Bible, all 66 books, guess who they feature? People. Guess what we know about people? They mess up, all right, pretty consistently. And one thing that's beautiful about the Bible is it doesn't sugarcoat that. All right, we've got the classic example is David, who committed adultery with Bathsheba and has her husband Uriah killed on the battlefield so he could marry her. Does the mere fact that the Bible records that happening mean God's okay with murder and adultery? No. Now, in that particular example, the very next chapter, we actually see Nathan the prophet condemning David for doing that. But that's the point. It's just because the Bible shows you something happening doesn't mean God agrees with it. You've got to read carefully and ask, does it ever say God condones this action? So let me ask you that. Knowing all that now, going back to the previous slide here, what do you think Jephthah should have done? This is the hard question. When Jephthah, after he's made this vow to God, and he sees his daughter come out the door, what should he have done?
Appealed to God.
Appealed to God? Yeah. I mean, when we ask the question like that, it seems very hard because we're thinking, oh my gosh, well, he made this vow. We should keep our vows to God. All right, let me ask a stupid question. I'll rephrase the question a little bit. What should we do when we sin?
Turn to God.
Ask for forgiveness, right? Repent. I mean, now the question sounds a lot easier, doesn't it? What did Jephthah do when he made that boneheaded, stupid vow to God? He sinned, right? Why do we think that's going to be any different than any other time the Bible records someone sinning? It happens. Should he have killed his daughter? I say no. You don't cure one sin by doing another one. All right? You repent and you ask for forgiveness. All right? All right. Let's see, where are we at now? Now, so what we saw there was this instance where a child was sacrificed, but God didn't condone it. All right, we read the passage, we clearly, God never approved of it. So let's move on to one where it's pretty clear that God did. All right, Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. This is on pages 10 and 11 of the book. It's a pretty long passage, but it's one you probably all know. All right, and this is the one I promised we were going to get to. Anybody want to volunteer to read that one for us? Yeah, please.
Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. And God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son, Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here, the donkey, while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and a knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld him from me, your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram. Caught by its horns, he went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided."
All right. Here's one of the most famous passages, and one of the ones I included in the advertising for this class, so I'm going to fulfill a promise right off the bat. We're going to talk about Abraham and Isaac, all right? I kind of answered the first question to this one already inadvertently before we even read the passage. What is different about this story from the story of Jephthah's daughter? Here, is there any doubt that God condoned what Abraham was doing? There can't be any doubt of that, can there? I mean, God's the one that told him to do it. So this is an example of, again, number one, reading carefully. You can, hopefully, if nothing else, this passage with Abraham and Isaac helps you start to recognize what wasn't there in the passage with Jephthah's daughter. All right, a clear declaration that this is God's will. All right, what's going on here? Here it clearly is, so we kind of have to move on to figure out something else. So let me ask you this next question, all right? Again, it's a matter of reading carefully. I want you to look back there when Abraham is talking to his servants towards the beginning of the passage. What did Abraham say to his servants before he and Isaac left to go up the mountain?
He said, we will return.
He said, we will return. Thank you. Good catch. Wait a minute. Why on earth would he have said that? Now, we're going to get into this in more detail, but I was kind of curious what your initial thoughts were. What do you think Abraham was thinking when he tells his servants specifically, we will return? What do you think was going through his head?
Faith God would provide.
That God would provide. Yeah. Let's look at that. Yeah, go ahead.
He trusted God to give him this son, so he may be trusting God implicitly to allow him to keep his son.
Exactly. He trusted God to give him a son. And we're going to see it's even, this particular promise. Anybody remember? I mean, we're going to dive into this obviously in a minute. But did anybody remember what the specific promise God gave to Abraham was and how it related to Isaac in particular? You're smiling at me.
Stars in the skies.
Going to have as many descendants as the stars in the sky.
Yeah, sand on the beach.
Sands on the beach. And you know, it wasn't just a general promise. It was through Isaac, not through your son. Let's take a look at that as we go through here. But first, what I want to talk about, and we're hitting on some of these, this is great to begin with. We'll come back to maybe some of those questions. We'll work our way through them. But Paul Coughlan has written a book called Is God a Moral Monster? Making Sense of the Old Testament God. It's a great resource. I highly recommend it. Talks about a lot of the same things we're talking about in this class. Not all the same. Goes into a lot more detail about them. But it's also a relatively easy read. This isn't like here I'm about to say, it's not like a real seminary level textbook, but it was one of my textbooks in seminary. But I read it before I went to seminary. So it is something that you can just get it on Amazon, whatever. But one of the things he mentioned is we have to keep in mind the surrounding context, and that's part of what we've already started hitting on here and realizing. And he pointed out 4 different things that Abraham knew at the time God gave him this instruction, all right? He knew, number one, that the instruction to sacrifice Isaac came from God, all right? It didn't come from some other human being. It came from God. That makes a difference. We'll talk about that in a minute. He knew that God had the ability to restore life, whereas humans do not, all right? So, I mean, God literally created Adam and Eve from dust. He created life, all right? So is death any issue for him? I mean, obviously, we know the answer to that maybe a bit more clearly because we're looking back on it after Jesus' resurrection, which Abraham didn't have the luxury of, but he knew that God created life to begin with, all right? Number 3, God had promised Abraham that he would make him into a great nation through Isaac. This is what we were just talking about before. Also, understand the context leading up to this. What had happened prior to this is Abraham had another son, all right? Abraham and Sarah didn't initially trust God when God said he was going to give him a son. And so Abraham actually had a son from the servant Hagar, all right? And that they had Ishmael. Well, one of the things, and then you can imagine how that went between Sarah and Hagar. Things didn't go well after that. They didn't exactly get along. Sarah tells Abraham, I want you to get rid of him. Abraham's like, I can't do that because if I send them out in the wilderness, they're going to die. They're going to die. There's no way they're going to survive. God came to Abraham and said, no, they're not. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make Ishmael into a great nation too. Trust me. He's going to be fine. All right? Abraham did trust him and God came through. All right? So that whole test has already taken place before this. Abraham already passed the test with Ishmael to trust God with Ishmael's life before this test comes up with Isaac. So that's what Paul Coughlan's referring to there with number 4. All right. Looking at a couple of passages here. The first one is what I was talking about, the general promise that was made to Abraham from God. This is in Genesis chapter 15, verse 5. And he said, he took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. People know that passage. We remember that passage. We sometimes forget what comes up in chapter 21, verse 12, when God specifically said, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. This is before God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. So the specific promise was made through him. All right. Given this information, let me ask you a few questions here. All right. Well, actually, let me back up for a second. We talked about the fact that the instruction to sacrifice Isaac came from God, not another human being. Why is that significant? What was the first basic principle we talked about tonight?
God is morality, He's the standard.
Yeah, God is the standard for morality, okay? So we know that the instruction, if it's coming from God, number one, it can't be immoral. Now, what a lot of people think, that means, well, does God... They come and almost equate the instructions when they come from God with the instructions that come from a human being, all right? Clearly, if a human being comes up and tells you to kill a kid, you don't do it, all right? You don't do it. But when the instruction comes from God, that's at least one piece of the puzzle. It's a broader puzzle, obviously, but it's one piece of the puzzle, is that this instruction is coming from God. You got to look at it differently. But this gets back to what I told you before. What we see, and we're not going to go into a big, deep theological lesson here, but there certainly was a theological lesson being taught, not just to Abraham, but for our benefit many, many years later, all right? I mean, anybody see parallels to any other son being sacrificed by the father? Ring a bell to anybody? I mean, there's certainly a lot of parallels here between what's going on in this passage and what's going to happen later on with Jesus, right? And the lesson we're being taught is to trust God, all right? Knowing that that's what this is kind of pointing towards, does it make any sense whatsoever? Would it make any sense forever now, today, for God to give somebody the same type of instruction after Jesus' sacrifice has already happened? No, it would make no sense at all, which is why I can tell you very safely and very securely, if you ever for a minute think God is telling you to go out and kill a kid, that ain't from God. All right? So we can rest assured that we're not going to be put in this type of position, because it theologically wouldn't make sense given the overarching message of the Bible. Now, knowing all of that, let's take a look back again at what I asked you before. Remember I said, what did Abraham tell the servants? All right? And what did he tell the servants when he left them? We will return. So we have a situation where Abraham knows the instruction comes from God. He knows that God is the master of life to begin with. He knows that God previously told him to trust him with Ishmael's life, and he did, and God came through. We also know that he promised Abraham that he would give him more descendants than anyone can possibly imagine, and those descendants would come through Isaac. As far as Abraham, knowing that's his base of knowledge at the time this is all happening, does he think Isaac is going to die? Nope.
Why did he draw the knife?
God told him to, didn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, you have a question, Gene?
You know, what I don't understand is why was he testing him again, or was he doing this for our purpose? Because he knew Abraham trusted him.
Well, did he? I mean, the answer to that is it's yes and yes. I mean, it is for our benefit, but it can also be for Abraham's. Understand something. It's one thing, Ishmael was not the child of promise, all right? Ishmael was not the one that God promised to make Abraham's descendants through, all right? And so, yes, I think personally, I look back at this and I think, okay, the Ishmael test was really more than anything preparing Abraham for the Isaac test. Because what he's really asking him to do is not trust him, just you're going to kill your son. I think really that the factor of trust here that's being tested is trusting to know that your son's not going to die. I mean, that's what's being tested here. To know that based on everything you know, do you trust me with this son who I've promised to give you descendants through? So you go through these motions. If you go through these motions knowing all the while that your son is not going to die. I mean, he even said God's going to provide the lamb, right? I mean, he says it while he's on his way up. A lot of people look at that and think that, oh, he's just consoling his son. I don't think so. I think he meant that literally. He knew exactly what was going on because he trusted God. Yeah.
I think this whole Isaac-Abraham thing was God's way of pointing out to Abraham what his son was going to eventually become.
I agree. And that's what I was getting when Gene asked me, well, was it for our benefit or for his? And the answer is both. I mean, lots of times when you see things, especially in the Old Testament, understand that we sometimes get too caught up in seeing what does this prefigure for the new, okay? What is this pointing towards the New Testament? And there's nothing wrong with that per se, because tons of things in the Old Testament rather, are certainly pointing towards things in the new. But they're not exclusively pointing to. When we do that, we only look at it from that perspective. Sometimes we lose focus on what the meaning was for the people right then and there. And this certainly did serve a purpose for Abraham. This was the ultimate test of faith. So the book of Hebrews can come back later on when it's talking about giving us today examples of people of faith, and it can say, look at Abraham. There's an example of faith. Now, is the example of faith that he was willing to kill his son because God told him to? No. The example of faith is because he knew God wasn't going to have him kill his son. That's what's going on, yeah.
Where did and why, what is the purpose of sacrificing anyhow? They're sacrificing people, animals? Why?
Well, that depends on who you ask.
I'm asking you.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I mean by that is it depends on what culture you're in. All right, you've got, understand, and this is something I think we'll get to in a later week, you've got this pocket in Israel where God is trying to create his own people, all right, that are set apart from the rest of the world around them, because he's preparing the way for the new covenant, basically. So he sets up this sacrificial system in Israel where they're sacrificing animals to atone for their sins, for example. Why? Because he needs to establish that framework so people start thinking in that manner so they'll understand what Jesus' sacrifice is. The problem is that in the surrounding nations, they also were making sacrifices. They were sacrificing animals. But their sacrifices weren't of the same nature as what God was asking to be done. They weren't sacrificing to pay the price for their sins. When the sacrifices were made by the surrounding nations, they were usually to try to convince their gods to do something. All right? We want a plentiful harvest, so we're going to kill a kid. All right? I mean, that's an extreme example, but yeah, child sacrifice was going on. And so the culture that Israel was surrounded by was one where the sacrifices were made almost like a quid pro quo, almost to force the God's hands to do something for them. So what God did is he steps into that type of environment and says, okay, this is what you're familiar with, but I'm going to put a whole new spin on it. All right? You're not sacrificing to get something from me. All right? I'm not going to promise you, for example, that I'm going to take away your pain and suffering. It's a whole other issue. We have all the class. Now, we did last year, actually. Something we covered last summer is the problem of pain and suffering. God doesn't promise he's going to take it away. He doesn't promise, not in this life. Obviously, next life is something different. He doesn't promise that we're all going to have plentiful harvest and there's not going to be droughts and everything like that. He never gives that promise. For him, what he says, he takes this sacrificial system and he says, this is how you can be reconciled to me, so that you can live eternally with me through this system. And the only way for to do that, because God has to be just, he has to punish sin, all right? And so part of what is going on, it's the atonement and Jesus' sacrifice on the crosses. We could have a whole 6-week class on that and everything that was accomplished with that. But part of it is to atone for our sins so that we can spend eternity with him. If he just came down willy-nilly without first establishing this whole Old Testament system where people were sacrificing animals and they start to think of sacrifices differently than what they probably were thinking of them because of the surrounding nations, if he just came into that environment and said, and Jesus shows up and says, okay, believe in me and you'll be saved, what are people's reaction going to be? They're going to think he's a nutcase. And they don't have the cultural framework to understand what's going on. And even if they came to think that they understood that somehow Jesus was sacrificing for them, they're probably going to interpret that in the same way as the surrounding nations would. Okay, so Jesus sacrificed, he died for me, that means I'm going to get a good harvest this year, right? No, they're not going to understand. So that's the long answer, I guess, to the question is the reason God's doing this is to try to prepare his people for what Jesus is going to be doing for them. So we'll have a church today. I mean, that's why we have a Christian church today, because that framework was laid first. You can't have the New Testament without the Old. So, okay? All right. Moving on. Well, the last question I do want to hit on there, it's just, no matter what Abraham did, was Isaac ever in any danger? No. Isaac was never in any danger this whole time. All right? And you understand that if you look at the surrounding context, which brings us to our third basic principle. Understand, when we were trying to evaluate what was going on with Abraham and Isaac, we didn't just look to within the confines of the story of Abraham and Isaac, did we? We had to look at the previous chapters, understand what Abraham was going through leading up to this, understand what God had promised him, all right? You always make sure we take in the entire surrounding textual context before coming to a conclusion. I use the word textual here to distinguish it from something we'll talk about here with a basic principle coming up. But textual context meaning in the text. Read the surrounding text. Read what comes before it. Read what comes after it. If we're dealing with a particular character, read what else you can learn about that particular character, in this case, Abraham. Find out what he knew going in. Now, you do see, and we did see in this one passage, at least a hint that there was something else going on, and it was that word we. All right? The moment we read that word, we shall return. All right? That's your clue. Wait a minute. Maybe I need to go back and do some more reading and see what's Abraham mean by that. Is Abraham lying to his servants? Is he lying to his son when he says God will provide the lamb just to try because he's ashamed of what he's about to do? Well, I mean, if you were to just read the Abraham and Isaac story, I think that's certainly a possible interpretation. But when you read the surrounding context, you realize, no, that's not what's going on. Abraham knew exactly what he was talking about. That's the point of the test. Did he trust that Isaac was always safe through the whole thing? All right. Moving on. Other instances of child abuse. If you are a skeptic and you want to draw up sympathy for your cause and animosity against God, all you got to do is bring out the kid who's being punished unjustly, right? Child sacrifice is one favorite of that, but there are plenty other examples that people will bring up that don't necessarily involve sacrifice of a child, but involve some other perceived child abuse. So the next passage we're going to take a look at is 2 Samuel Chapter 12. My voice is doing okay, so tell you what, I'll take a turn and read this one because it's a little complicated. It's verse 9, and then we skip ahead. All right, this is on pages 13 and 14 of the book if anybody wants to follow along. Now, remember I told you earlier that David, King David, decided he really liked Bathsheba when he was looking at her from his rooftop. Guess what people did on the roofs back then? They took baths, all right? What was he looking at? But he was not looking at something he should have been looking at to begin with, okay? But he sees Bathsheba, he likes her, and so he ends up killing, essentially, her husband Uriah. He basically says, okay, here's what I want you to do, Commander. I want, whenever we're up there and we're fighting, and Uriah's in the front lines, I want everybody else to just suddenly back off and leave Uriah there by himself to fight the whole enemy's army all by himself. Guess how that went for Uriah? Not well. Okay, and then once Uriah's dead and out of the picture, he marries Bathsheba. All right, I'm shortening it. There's a lot more to the story than that. But what happens after that? All right, the prophet Nathan comes and has some words with David about this. Now, that in and of itself isn't the problem. Hey, we're all happy with God's prophet telling David he did something wrong. What unsettles some people is the punishment that was inflicted for David's sin. Let's take a look at that. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die. But because by doing this you have shown utter contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die. After Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife had borne to David, and he became ill. David pleaded with God for the child. He fasted and spent the nights lying in sackcloth on the ground. The elders of his household stood beside him to get him up from the ground, but he refused, and he would not eat any food with them. On the seventh day, the child died. David's attendants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they thought, while the child was still living, he wouldn't listen to us when we spoke to him. How can we now tell him the child is dead? He may do something desperate. David noticed that his attendants were whispering among themselves, and he realized the child was dead. Is the child dead, he asked. Yes, they replied. He is dead. Then David got up from the ground. After he had washed, put on lotions, and changed his clothes, he went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he went to his own house, and at his request, they served him food, and he ate. His attendants asked him, "Why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now the child is dead, you get up and eat." He answered, "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he is dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me." All right. First question out of the gate. We got to, again, address, this is what I mean by addressing these things head on. Let's not shy away from it, all right? For whose sin did this baby die? His own or David's? David's, right? I mean, that's clearly what's going on here. So, this one's a harder question. Nathan, in part of his rebuke to David, he said he had shown utter contempt for the Lord, not for Uriah, not for Bathsheba, but for the Lord. Why do you think Nathan jumps to that conclusion? Maybe jumps isn't the right word for it, but arrives at that conclusion where he says, your actions, David, by committing adultery and murder, showed contempt for the Lord. What do you think he meant by that?
Because he wasn't obeying God's law.
He wasn't obeying God's law. Yeah. So that's something that we need to keep in mind, right? That understand there's no such thing as a private sin. No such thing. If God is omnipresent, which means he's everywhere. All right? If God is omniscient, it means he knows everything. I don't care how many doors you close and lock, God knows what's going on. All right? But more than we're gonna come back to that question because there's even more going on here, I think, when we're specifically talking about David. Now, what about the way David closed? That they closed this, the last passage in there where David said, "I will go to him," meaning his dead son, "but he will not return to me." What do you think David meant by that?
He will die and go to him.
I'm sorry?
He will die and go to him.
He will die and go to him. Let me ask you a question. What do you think, what does that mean? Does it just mean he's going to die? I mean, in other words, is David speaking figuratively here? We could figuratively say that, I'm going to go to him in the sense that I'm going to die too, and not necessarily be implying anything about an afterlife. All right? Just, we're speaking figuratively. Or David could be speaking literally here, where his son is existing in some place, even though he is dead, that David is going to go to as well at some point in time. All right? This is another example where if we were just look at this passage alone, I think either one of those is a possible interpretation. But do we have anywhere else we can go in the Bible where we can see things, for example, that David has written to see what David thought about whether or not there really was an afterlife? It's a big book. Psalms, yeah. He's written a lot of them, didn't he? And so, as we'll see here momentarily, we can go and look into Psalms to see what did David think. And that will shed light on this passage, because if we see something elsewhere that David has written that shows us that he really did believe that there was life after death, then we can say, okay, no, now that's shed some light on this. Now we know he's speaking literally here. He thinks that his son is still alive somewhere, just not here in this world. All right. So that kind of lays some groundwork for us. Let's take a look at these in a little bit more specifically, starting with a passage from Deuteronomy, chapter 24, verse 16. It's on page 15 of the book is where we're at. And this addresses the first question we asked about whose sin did this child die for, all right? And this is where we have the problem, all right? Parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their parents. Each will die for their own sin. All right, that's the general rule that God laid down. Did God break his own rule? Anybody know what the book of Deuteronomy is? I mean, what's going on in the book of Deuteronomy? Anybody know? Leviticus does a lot of this too. I'm sorry? The law, right? God's handing down his law that to the nation of Israel, he's establishing this nation, all right? And he's telling you, here's what the rules are that are going to be governing you as a nation. So specifically what God is saying here is he's talking to Israel, humans who are going to be serving as judges over other humans, and saying, you human judge, this is the rule you need to follow, all right? That does not necessarily mean that this is the rule God needs to follow. Remember what we just talked about with Abraham and Isaac. If a human being were to walk up to Abraham and tell him the exact same thing that God did, should Abraham have listened? No. All right? But because the message came from God, it changes things. And that also gives you the context. Oh, it's from God? Well, that means I can look back to see what God did for me with Ishmael. All right? That means I can look back at the promise God made to me through Isaac. All right? It does change things a bit when we're talking about something coming from God versus coming from a human being. And so you understand the context of that Deuteronomy passage is specifically saying this is what human judges are supposed to do when they're sitting in judgment over other humans. Now, does that necessarily mean the rule is different from God, for God? No, it doesn't. But it does mean that's an important contextual clue that we have to take into account. We have to understand that this doesn't necessarily mean that this applies to God. The rules could be different when we're dealing with God. There could be things that are privileges that are reserved to God that aren't reserved for other people. We'll come back to that in a minute. Another thing, this gets to the question we talked about when I asked about, what did it mean? What did Nathan mean when he said that David was dishonoring God per se, not just Uriah, not just Bathsheba? 2 Corinthians 5:20. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though he were making his appeal through us. What does it mean to be an ambassador? A representative, right? So if the United States ambassador goes and to some foreign nation, or the ambassador to some other country, and they walk up to the president of that other country and punch them in the face, how do you think that's going to go over? Not good. And the president of that country is probably going to call up our president and complain about it, right? Because that ambassador's actions are representative of our president, of our country, all right? And so they're going to be imputed to our country. That's what it means to be an ambassador. That's what it means to be a representative. Understand, like it or not, the world is going to judge Jesus based on what they see you doing, all right? You might not like it, and believe me, it's a humbling thing. When you look back and I realize, why would the world be judging Jesus based on me? Because I'm not worthy of that. But it's something we need to keep in our mind. Now, think about who David was. Was David just any old Jewish person? Who was he?
King.
He was the king. Not only was he just any old king, he was God's anointed king. Remember, Samuel actually, they prayed out all of his brothers, and they say, nope, 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 nope. Oh, the little runt of the litter? Yep, that's the one. God specifically chose David. When David, given that background, commits this egregious of a sin, what do you think all the surrounding nations are thinking? They're going to use that against God. Gee, God, why on earth? This is really the person you chose? Oh, God of the Hebrews? You chose an adulterer and a murderer for your king? Well, that doesn't look too well on God, doesn't reflect well on God at all, does it? So the stakes here of what David did, we can't underestimate. The sin was far greater than we might initially be thinking that it actually was. It was a pretty bad one. All right. Take a look at Psalm chapter 16, verses 9 through 11. All right? And this is what I was talking about. Does anybody want to read this one for us? It's not that long. It's on pages 15 and 16 of the book if you want to read that. This is a psalm of David, so you're reading David's words here. Anyone want to read it for us? Thank you.
Therefore my heart is glad, and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest secure, because you will not abandon me to the realms of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with the joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand.
All right. Now we have some context. This is something that was written by David. What does David think about life after death? Is there another life after this one? Yes, he clearly believes that there is. Now go back and look what he said at the end of that other passage about, he can't come to me, but I will go to him. Is he speaking figuratively or is he speaking literally, that he literally believes his son is someplace that he's going to go?
In paradise.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, he's saying, clearly, if we know he believes there's life after death, we can take that and look back at that earlier passage and say, okay, when he says his son is someplace, he really means his son is someplace, all right? And he can't cross over to that life because he's still part of the living, but eventually he will. And he will actually, in a very real sense, be joining his son. So even David still understood after all this happened, his son was still alive, all right? That's very important because we tend to look at things like this from a very human perspective. Like it or not, our culture, everything around us tells us that death is the end, all right? We act sometimes, whether we like to admit it, like death is the end. Death is not the end. We need to start looking at these passages from God's perspective, especially when we're talking about actions taken by God, and not from our human perspective. Compared to eternity, this life is a blip on the radar screen. And it means nothing. I mean, it's literally the suffering, everything we go through in this life is going to pale in comparison to what eternity is going to be like. So we look at this child dying very young and we think that's a tragedy, and it is if it were to happen, especially at the hands of another human being. But end result-wise, all right, is that child in a better place now? Yeah, David's child is in a much better place than David is, right? So does that mean, like a lot of people, I'll be honest, they'll hear this explanation, they'll look and say, oh, well then I guess infanticide's okay. I guess abortion's okay. Because really all we're doing is speeding things along and sending someone on to a better destination than they would otherwise be at. To which I reply, are you God? That's not your decision to make, all right? You're not omnipotent. You're not omniscient, rather. You don't know everything. You don't know if that life that you're taking, maybe God had intended for a greater purpose. Maybe the life you just took was the next Billy Graham, all right? God knows that. You don't. So this type of discussion where we're talking about God taking a life, it's not the same as a human taking a life, and we can never put ourselves in that position. I want to give you an example. Well, first, the basic principle here is there are privileges that are reserved to God by nature of him being God, all right? And I actually have the illustration on no, it is the next slide, I'm sorry. Here's the example I want to give for it, all right? That might humanize it a little bit more and make it hit home. This is not in the book. This is a privilege you get just for being in the class because it's actually something that came to me, again, as I was having a conversation with someone on Facebook recently, asked me a question, and I answered it. Very similar question to what we're dealing with here, and I'd already published the book and printed it, so I didn't get to include it in that, but I think I will include it in the revision. Can a judge incarcerate a person as punishment for a crime? Can they lock him up in jail? Yes. Does that mean a private citizen is perfectly allowed to take a person and lock them up? No, we call that kidnapping, right? You can't do that. And that's because there's a difference in authority between the judge and a private citizen. If we recognize that there's a difference in authority between a judge and a private citizen, why can't we recognize that there's a difference in authority between God and humanity? Same thing. As a matter of fact, this argument is even stronger when we're talking about God than we're talking about a human judge, right? That's the point of this basic principle. Is there are some things, the judge, in the nature of him or her being a judge, has some authority that other people don't. Just like God, by the nature of being God, has authority that we humans do not. All right, and we need to bear that in mind. All right. Moving on, we got about 15 minutes left and just a few pages left. We've gotten to 4 out of the 5 basic principles. We're moving right along. Let's see if we can tackle this last one. All right, and this is from Psalm 137. Psalm 137 is what is called an imprecatory psalm. What that means is there are certain psalms that are basically requests to God to bring down judgment about somebody. Somebody is being mean to Israel. They're committing some atrocious, egregious sin. And so whoever writes the psalm is asking God to punish this person for what they're doing. All right? That's the nature of this psalm. Now, that in and of itself is not a bad thing. I mean, we certainly can wish that God would punish sinners, all right? There's nothing wrong with that. Now, we have to keep in mind when we're asking that we're included in that category, okay? But there's nothing wrong per se with that. But the issue with this particular psalm comes up with what exactly this person asks God to do, all right? So let's take a look at this. Because we're short on time, I'll go ahead and read this one. It's on the top of page 17. It says, "Daughter Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks." Ooh. Yeah, we were all cheering until we got to that last passage. Everybody ever been in a speech like that where you're hearing some really powerful speaker? Hopefully you haven't had this experience tonight. And they're saying, yeah. Ew. That's kind of that psalm, right? It's like, wait a minute, that something ain't right there. Now, we could fall back on one of our earlier principles, first of all, and say, does anywhere say that God approved of that? It doesn't, right? It's not specifically in there. Now, for one reason or another, however, we do have to acknowledge that the Holy Spirit did inspire this particular passage to be included in the book of Psalms. All right, so there's that we have to deal with. But it doesn't specifically say, but there's more going on here than just that. That's not the reason why I've included this psalm in here. First of all, understand that at the very beginning, this is addressed to Babylon, right? Babylon is the country that conquered Jerusalem in 605 BC and took a large number of Jews off into captivity. All right, so that's the context of what's going on here. The Jews aren't in Israel at this time. Understand that. They're in Babylon, in a foreign nation, having been taken away. Believe it or not, that's crucial to understanding what's going on here. Let me ask you a couple questions. This should seem pretty easy. We'll skip the first one because we'll come back to that. We already talked about why that the prayers are imprecatory in nature, asking for God to employ his judgment. But this question should be obvious, I hope. Should we be rejoicing in infants being dashed against the rocks? Thank you. I'm glad I know it's getting toward the end of the class, so maybe that's why we didn't get such an immediate response, but I would hope we'd all be able to universally agree on that. We don't want to be killing infants. Lest there be any doubt, look at this passage from Romans chapter 12, 17 through 18. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Starts right off. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Just because Babylon's doing this to you does not mean you should be doing it to Babylon. Okay? You can ask, and that's really what's going on here. They're really asking God to impose judgment. But when you're taking that judgment and you're saying kill innocent babies, that's taken a little bit too far, I think. All right? So is that really what's going on here? Is this psalmist really asking for God to kill innocent babies? One of the problems we have lots of times is understanding that the Bible was not written in English in 21st century America. And yet we are reading it in English in 21st century America. Imagine if someone were to come 1,000 years from now and read something someone wrote today that said, "It was raining cats and dogs outside." Oh my gosh, we have to start studying what was atmospherically going on 1,000 years ago. Somehow, were they flying dogs and cats up in those things they called aeroplanes and dropping them out? If so, why were they doing that? Was it some kind of weird sacrificial thing to try to make it rain? What was going on? It's an expression, right? Which we all understand right now. It just means it's raining really, really hard. But if someone's removed from our culture, are they going to understand that? It's a cultural expression that we understand because we're living in that culture. Guess what? We're not living in the same culture that they were living in 2,000 years ago. We don't speak the same language that they were speaking, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, really. We don't. And so lots of times, anybody, I don't know how many people in here speak more than one language, but anybody that does, you ever try to translate from one to another, inevitably there's going to be some problems you're going to come across sometimes. Because lots of times concepts don't translate necessarily one to one. And so we always have to bear in mind that sometimes what we're reading might not translate exactly, and there might be some cultural factor that we're not taking into account. All right. The first thing, talking about the language, all right, that word that we have in this version, this is the New International Version that I have quoted on there, that's on the screen, uses the word infants, all right? Actually, it's not on the screen, it's on the screen earlier, but still, it used the word infants, all right? The actual Hebrew term there, which is in your book, I'm not going to try to pronounce it for you. I admit I'm not a languages expert. It doesn't actually necessarily mean infants, and the New American Standard Bible actually does probably a little better job. It translates this as your little ones or your offspring. Nothing in the word itself denotes any particular age. It's more of a generational thing. It's talking about the next generation. Right? The concept that's really being communicated here is not wishing that we could kill little innocent babies. The concept that's being communicated here is that the Babylonians are repeating the same sins generation after generation. And so what they're saying is, punish this generation, punish the next generation that's still doing this. Even these people that are doing this to us, their next generation that's repeating their sins, punish them too. All right? It's not literally infants. All right? But you're not going to get that if you don't speak Hebrew, all right, of the time. Not only that, here's the one that I found very amusing when I first started studying this. Where did I say that the Israelites were at the time this was being written? They're in Babylon. All right? Where does it say these infants should be dashed against?
Rocks.
Anybody know about anything about the geology of Babylon? There weren't any big old rocks in Babylon, all right? We think of, when we read the Bible, we always think of the topography of Israel because that's what we're always familiar with. That's what we see on the National Geographic channels and all that. But they weren't in Israel. Sure, Israel had big rocks. And when Israel wanted to do construction, they would take those rocks, cut them apart, use those rocks to make their construction. Babylon didn't have big rocks. They couldn't do that. They actually had to create mud bricks in order to do their construction, all right? Now, if you were literally living in Babylon at the time, are you going to know that? Yeah, I mean, you're going to look, it's part of your daily life to know there ain't no rocks around here, all right? Thousands of years later, we don't know that. We're bringing in our assumptions that aren't necessarily warranted. Something that would have been very clear to people at the time is just not clear to us today. Obviously, this isn't meant to be taken literally. It couldn't be taken literally. There literally were no rocks to dash them against. All right? So again, if you understand the cultural context at the time, you understand that this is somebody speaking figuratively about punishing multiple generations that are continuing to sin. That's what's actually being said here. We know that because we look back at the original language and we look back at the original culture. Without knowing the original language and the original culture, we're going to be missing something here. All right?
Footnote addresses that in a way.
I'm sorry?
I said the footnote addresses that.
And that's the benefit of a good study Bible, because it will have notes that will tell you that. Now, or a good commentary. Now, that's going to be more expensive, obviously. I'm partial to the New American Commentary. I like that. If you go down to my office, you're going to see I have almost a whole collection down there because Lifeway, unfortunately, was going out of business and had them all on sale for like 60% off. So that was a good deal. But yeah, there's resources you can tap into, and a study Bible is a good one.
And what they say is treat the Babylonians, not treat them the way the Babylonians treated us.
Right. It's asking God to punish sin is basically what's going on here. All right. Now, which is basic principle number 5. Sometimes our failure to understand a difficult passage is because we're missing some nuance from the original language or the historical cultural context in which the action takes place. All right, one of the things, if anybody ever wants to go to seminary, if anybody's ever been to seminary, you've taken what's called a hermeneutics class. It's always like one of the first classes you have to take. Hermeneutics is basically how to study the Bible, how to read the Bible, how to properly interpret the Bible. It's not telling you this is what it means and this is what you should think it means. It's telling you how to go about doing it, just like I'm trying to give you these basic principles to tell you how to address these questions, all right? And one of the number one rules every hermeneutics professor is ever going to teach you is context, 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 whether it be the textual context like I just just talked about. Literary context is something a little bit, arguably a little bit different. But historical, cultural context, you have to understand what was going on in the culture at the time, or you might misinterpret what you're reading, which is why nobody expects you all to be experts in that. Get a study Bible where you can learn from somebody who is. I mean, that's a good thing to do. All right, so quick review in the last 3 minutes we've got here. Tonight, we've looked at a number of examples about God's morality, passages, specific passages that people sometimes often raise to try to claim that God is doing something immoral, and I've hopefully successfully shown that that's not what's going on at all. And the way we know that's not going on at all is that we apply 5 basic principles, all right? These principles are things that you can take, and you can also use them as a checklist. If you come across a passage that you think somebody's saying, well, gee, God's doing something here that seems a little bit puzzling, start at the top and work your way down, one by one, until you come across something that makes you think, oh, this might apply here. Maybe I need to look deeper into this principle, all right? Number 1, even labeling an act as immoral in the first place requires God to be the source of all that is good. But in order to call something wrong, there has to be something that's right. In order for there to be a right, there has to be God. Number 2, just because the Bible records an action does not mean God has condoned that action. Probably at least half of the examples people are going to cite to you, you can resolve with that one just by reading carefully. All right. Number 3, always make sure we take in the entire surrounding textual context before coming to a conclusion. If it's something that's going on with a particular person in the Bible, what else does the Bible tell you about that person? Maybe with David, we could look at the Psalms to see what else he said. With Abraham, we had to look at the preceding chapters. Again, a good study Bible with cross-references can help you with that as well. Number 4, there are privileges reserved to God by nature of him being God. Just like a judge has the right to lock up a criminal, but you don't, there are things that God has the right to do that humans don't. And number 5, sometimes our failure to understand a difficult passage is because we're missing some nuance from the original language or the historical cultural context in which the action takes place. If you're not inclined to go to seminary, then I suggest you get a good study Bible or you get a good Bible commentary if you really want to go there. Because that's going to help you. If all the other ones fail and you get down to that number 5, that's not something you're going to be able just to work out on your own. You're going to need to consult some other resources to figure that out. And those are some great ways of going about that. All right? What we're going to do now over the next few weeks, the next 3 weeks, we're going to tackle these specific topics: slavery, genocide, gender equality. And we're going to take these 5 principles and we're going to be applying them to other passages in the Bible, so you're going to get some practice seeing how they actually play out as well. All right? Anybody have any questions? Very good. Thank you all. Tell people about it. These things they're independent. You want to bring more family and friends next week? Happy to have them. All right? Thanks, everybody. Good night.